Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. If you've checked the title, you'll see we have a guest, and we'll get to them very shortly. But before we do that, I've got to announce that Magical Learning is, of course, a training facilitation company that's been working for over 25 years and partnering with global thought leaders like Robin Sharma and John Mattone. We are going to check in with our regular team and see how they're going and just see what's been happening this week. So, Danette and Graham, you are in the mobile recording studio. I might start with you, Graham. How are you going this week?
I'm good, Jess. Thank you for asking. Yes, we are mobile in a stationary sort of way. That'd be stationary rather than I think.
Whatever.
Well, it's Friday. It's all I've got to go on. I did reach out to Frank Zappa about using the other. No, actually, that's not going to work, is it?
Makes no sense.
For those of you who can remember how Smoke on the Water came about originally, that's relevant. For everybody else who was born after the year 1632, I apologise. I'm good, Jess. Glad to be here.
That's good. Hopefully people go check out Smoke on the Water. It's the official companion song to this podcast, I'd say.
That is their weekend challenge, yes.
Our guest was headbanging there. We'll get to them shortly. It's already exciting. You got to check out the video on YouTube or Spotify to get the full experience. Let's go to Danette, though. Danette, how are you going this week? How's things?
Yeah, good. So I got back in from South Africa last Thursday evening. And today I'm I had 3 needles because I'm off on another trip next Saturday. So going to Ghana, which will be really, really interesting. So, and a few other places, but the needles are for Ghana. So anyway, had a great week and nice to be back home for a day or two.
Yes, very exciting. Well, we're excited to hear how the Ghana trip goes. And well, it's good to know that you'll be medically vaccinated so that the trip can go optimally. Awesome. Well, Danette and Graham, thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Kat Page, how are you going this week?
Really well, thanks. It's been a big week. Highlight today, it's actually Crazy Hair Day at primary school today. And my son, Alfie, he's in prep. So he was very excited to have what we call dinosaur spikes. So just basically, and then we coloured them red and blue. So he was pretty excited heading off to school this morning.
That's excellent. That's a really cool hairstyle. We've definitely had, for people that check out the video, there's some interesting hairstyles on the Magical Learning Podcast, myself included, as a platinum silver mullet in episodes gone by. So we appreciate a Crazy Hair Day here at the Magical Learning Podcast. Well, Dr. Kat Page, we are so excited to have you on because you are not only a great guest, but you are also an organisational psychologist, researcher, and leadership advisor focused on one central question: what makes work good for us? Over the past 2 decades, she's worked with teams across industries and geographies, from hospital wards and boardrooms to mining sites in the Andes and universities in Saudi Arabia. She is the author of the awesome new book, which we're going to be talking about, Good Work, Transforming Your Work from the Inside Out, which is published by Wiley. And you can see that. Yes, watch the video there. You'll see the cover. And it's also in your background there, Dr. Kat, which reframes burnout as systems problem rather than a personal failing. Based in Melbourne, Dr. Kat is a sought-after speaker on leadership, wellbeing, culture, and the future of work. Her book is out now online and in all good bookstores. And we're very excited to talk to you about that today. So please welcome Dr. Kat Page.
Cue applause.
That's it. So before we get into the book, did you want to tell us a little bit about sort of what the book's about for our listeners here before we dive into sort of the questions?
Yeah, sure. You've given a really good introduction though, Jez, so thank you. So really good work is built on what is a simple idea, but I think quite powerful, which is what if work was led and designed in a way so that it supports our well-being as opposed to harms us. So I really explore that in the beginning of the book, like what actually is good work and some of the research around it. And I draw on psychological research, which is my background, but also public health, epidemiology, management. So I look at it from different angles. What is it? Why should we care? And what is the impact if we get this right? And then the rest of the book is really written around an arc from me to we to us. So me is all about meeting the reader where they're at. So obviously we're all human and we're all fallible. We have our own experience of work. And so giving them some tools and strategies and ideas around what they can do for themselves. And then we ease more into sort of the team and relationship sphere. So things like addressing loneliness. We talk about psychological safety, which is a really important topic at the moment, how to get into collective flow. And then the third part of the book is around us. So then I start to think about systems, which, to the point that you made in the beginning, Jez, I do really think is the critical thing, that we need to fix work, not necessarily the worker. So spend quite a bit of time there. And then the book really just ends with some ideas, experiments, or provocations for people to take forward, just to play with. So none of us, I don't think, have the answer to this problem, but I do think if we bring our diverse experiences and ideas together, that together we can create something better.
I mean, there's so much in there. How can you not want to read this book? I mean, even if it's just for a personal level, or if it's what you want to really build a system, I mean, what a great pathway. I think we've got to dive right into the questions because there's so much to unpack. So I might throw over to Danette, Director of Learning. Danette, what was your questions, or questions, I should say, and why did you pick them?
So, Dr. Cat, I often start with a definition thing because our language has a lot of abstract words. So, really curious, when you talk about good work, how would you define what it is, but also what it isn't, so people know what we're talking about today? Thank you.
And I think it is important to start with that, isn't it, with definitions? I mean, what I like about good work is it kind of is what it says on the tin, so to speak. So it is work that is good for us in terms of our well-being, but also it's good for performance. So that's sort of the high-level aspect to that. If we get down into a little bit more detail, some people have asked me why I called it good work and not great work, which I think is a good question. So I actually, liked the idea of good work just feeling really tangible and really sort of achievable, but also good work, if you think about it, what most of us want from work and what we appreciate about work is when someone just tells us we've done a good job. And that makes us feel valued, appreciated, like we're achieving, we're making progress. But I also like the idea of good work as being good work is work that's designed to either be good for the person, but potentially meaningful. So, whether it's about, I think, the company doing good things or you feeling like you're making a difference or an impact or contributing in some way. So I sort of like those different angles to it. If I delve even deeper, some of the components that we know are good for good work, and therefore the opposite is also true, to your point. So I talk about these as my 6 C's, because there's a lot of research in this space, and I actually think sometimes having a framework to remember it actually helps all of us, myself included. So number 1, clarity. People need to feel like they know what success looks like and what's expected of them in their role. So you can think about that at the level of the role. And you can even think about that in just the context of your week. Like, am I really clear on what I want to get done this week, what success looks like? It's just the clarity around outcomes and success and role. Competence. So as humans, we need to feel like we're growing, we're getting better. We need to be told that we're doing a good job. So we need to feel competent, and work that's giving us that learning and that growth is good for us. I think I'm speaking to a very willing audience here. Control is probably the number one thing. So as humans, we need to feel like we're in control. So when we don't have control or autonomy in work, that is actually a really significant psychosocial risk. So that's really important. Contribution. So I was getting to this a little bit before, but we need to feel like our work is making a difference. So it could just be making a difference to the people around us, or it could be making a difference in, bigger ways. That sense of contribution or meaningfulness, and then connection as well. So a lot of what we go to work for is that sense of community and that sense of belonging. And when we have that, we tend to have better days. We tend to enjoy our work more. Like, that's why a lot of us work. It's for the people in many cases. And then lastly, care. So this is really about just feeling that in your work, you are treated as a human. So as a person, not as a machine. So yeah, being treated as a person, as a human, not a resource. And so then the opposite of all those things is also true. Role ambiguity, opposite of clarity, is really not good for us. Low control is not good for us. feeling stagnant, like you're not growing or not being stretched. Being bored is actually not a good thing for us. We need to feel like we're challenged. It's not about removing all challenge from our work. Most of us would be horrendously bored. Feeling lonely, being bullied, job insecurity. I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking of. These are all validated health risks for us.
Nice. Great answer, Dr. Kat. So my next question is, what are some of the ways that we can rethink productivity, given what you're writing about in the good work, but also why is this important for our listeners and viewers too?
Yeah. Productivity, do you mean why is productivity important, or why is good work important? Or a bit of both?
A bit of both. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a good question to ask because there's a lot of conversations around productivity at the moment. I think in many ways we have inherited a very industrialized view of productivity. You know, if you go back to really early management theory, the idea was that for people to be motivated and to be productive, we need to break things down to the smallest parts, make things really clear, take any of the decisions away from them, you know, break down the roles really into a series of parts and just make sure people do those things. So we know now that that's not the way people perform at their best, and that's not going to get them feeling creative, innovative, speaking up. It's not really tapping into the wisdom and the intelligence of the humans that are doing the work. So I think of productivity less about widgets and outputs and, you know, days sitting in the office or in front of a computer, and more about outcomes. So how do we think about what is the outcome of this work and what success looks like, and then working backwards from that. So someone could be sitting around doing nothing and actually be productive, I think, because we've got this idea of productivity. And I speak to, I want to connect back to Cal Newport's work here on slow productivity, which I love that book. We've got this sort of pseudo productivity idea that if we're in meetings all day long, we're in the office all day long, we must be productive. But I think most of us know that that's like the opposite of productivity. When we don't have space, when are we making connections between things? When are we coming up with ideas? When are we tapping into our best thinking? When are we getting on the balcony? So someone could look like they're just sitting there, but having the best thinking of their life and actually making connections that's going to minimize or eliminate waste. There's so much waste in organizations, and particularly in knowledge work. So I think we need to stop confusing visible busyness with productivity, because we just know that that's not true. And so in terms of why these things are important, you know, I think particularly given the absolute revolution that is AI, we are oftentimes thinking about how can we solve the problem of humans with AI. And what I mean by that is how do we reduce costs and make things more efficient by removing humans from the equation? What if we were to use AI to actually solve things that are important for humans? You know, so like I just think if we approach it in that way, and mental health being one of those problems that we know is that we should be using things like AI for, then we start to really think about productivity in a really new light. So good work is really about tapping into the aspects of work that are inherently human, and that if we meet these very intrinsic desires and needs that people have from their work, then we release their best thinking and their best output. And we get the best from people and get them working on the things that are most important. And let's use AI to do the things we know are actually not good for humans.
Great answer, Dr. Kat. Thank you so much. Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Well, I might just stay in the mobile recording studio. Graham, did you want to tell us what your question was?
For a change, because it's Friday, I'm going to keep this relatively straightforward. Sorry. My questions have a way of just rambling. So acknowledging that a lot of organisations today don't have or consider or look at building or adapting, modifying, replacing systems to help create places that are good for us in terms of the work that we do. What are some of the bigger challenges that you have seen recently around trying to almost sort of retrofit new ways of working, new ideas of thinking about working, etc., into an organisation that's relatively mature. So, we've been doing it this way for so long, it's not funny. And
Yeah.
also acknowledging that, going back to your point before about having this whole industrialized organizational productivity, production line sort of mindset, shifting away from that to being more aware of individual needs and
Mm.
wants and particularly around things like purpose. So it's not impossible, but probably harder to get a shared sense of purpose today
Mm.
because more of us have an expectation that I want to have some sense of meaning individually in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
How do you retrofit that into an organisation that might have been running for 30 or 40 years?
Yeah.
And did any of that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I think there's multiple aspects of that question, which I'll sort of tackle separately. I think retrofitting anything in theory is does not really work that well. It's quite challenging. But I think that is the reality that we're working with large corporates and organizations, many of which have been around for over 100 years. And so implementing anything new, if it has connotations for systems and organizational design, that's really, really challenging. So when I first started out in this space, that question felt easier because we were looking at good work and well-being from the perspective of individuals. And so if you're getting a bunch of individuals in a room together and teaching them about how they can make work good for them, that is a relatively easy thing to do, which is why I think a lot of organizations do that kind of thing. But the reality is that only has short-term gains, because even when you have the most skillful, resilient, knowledgeable people, they will still suffer stress and other issues because of the way that work is designed. And so when you start to tackle things like work design, things like billable hours or utilization or, even just the way an organization is organized, that becomes really, really difficult. So it's probably not too dissimilar to when we went through the digital revolution, which is kind of scary to think that's behind us now. We're in a new wave of things now. You had organizations that were digital first organizations. So I'm thinking of organizations like Eubank, as compared to a bank like a NAB, right? It's actually really easy to design an organization to align with principles if you're designing them from the very beginning. It's really hard to retrofit. But I do think some smaller organizations, like the one I work for now by many, that's always been part of what we do is about, that wasn't what we said at the time, but about creating work that gets the best out of people. And we all fundamentally believe that. But so it's actually easy in some ways because it's baked into everything and it's an easy conversation to have. But it's much harder. I do think though that putting that aside, if you are listening to this and you're a leader who is in a large, complex organizations, I would say there's still so much impact that you can have on people just by the way that you show up with people. So yes, as an example, yesterday I was working with a client. We sent them for an experience to Oz Harvest. The not-for-profit. They have an amazingly purposeful, purpose-driven organization. And you have chefs that are volunteering or working in those environments in the evening who are also working in a professional restaurant during the day. And what the participants noticed and what they were in conversation with the chef about was that she works all day in her paid job and then for whatever reason volunteers in this job, and she feels like a different person when she's volunteering in the evenings because she has this liberty, this purpose. And some of that is about the work itself, of course, but it is also about, the people that work around her and the permission and the autonomy that they have to be able to make decisions in line with that purpose. So there is a lot that leaders can do, even just by seeing people as a human and really seeing them, knowing who you are, who your family is, what your goals are, what you care about, and you see people as a whole person, you can fundamentally change the way that person experiences their work environment. So yes, it is hard to retrofit, and that takes longer. It's not impossible, but I think even in the short term, there's a lot that we can do just in our local environments with our teams and our colleagues. If that
Brilliant.
answers.
Thanks, Kat. So, Dr. Kat, thank you for that. If we had a week, maybe or longer, I'd love to dive deeper into a conversation around what's the best replacement for capitalism that is going to change the subterranean why for corporates so we can actually move some of this stuff forward a lot faster, because at the moment They're like even using things for like using AI and how we use AI and why we use AI in a lot of organisations at the moment is based more on, will this make us money and how will it make money for us faster, rather than what's good for
Yeah.
the people. But that's a conversation for another time. Thank you. Really
I
appreciate it.
completely. Let's not say neoliberalism. So, I will say though that I do think there is a space for purpose and profit to come together. And I actually think that's probably where ultimately we need to get to. And let's not shy away from that. Like, organizations still need to make money, but you can do it in a way that still meets the needs of the human beings doing the work.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's like a heap of examples of that. But I do think that's probably hopefully the next wave.
Nice.
Fingers crossed. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. Great responses there. And I've got all these questions that are kind of pinging around my head. I did want to talk a little bit about psychological safety, Kat, but one of the things that you were talking about really struck a chord with me, because I was thinking about something similar this morning when we were talking about the industrialized idea of productivity and also sort of that idea of doing nothing can be productive. And I was just thinking this morning, like, we have all these ideas about how creativity in business might look as a performance, almost, in the sense that, like, when you think of Isaac Newton, gravity came to him when he was sitting under a tree. When you think of, like, Einstein, a lot of the relativity ideas came when he was, like, on a train or when he was biking around Germany or all this stuff. It was all this sort of, like, time where they're not focused on work, And so I was just thinking, like, when you're talking about doing nothing can be productive, and we see sort of like some of the biggest results, in physics or whatever, have come from these moments of not really doing anything and being left alone. It's really interesting to think of how, when I think about it now in terms of like what creativity looks like almost in a corporate thing, it's almost a performance, because that is so different than how you might consider it in a normal corporate environment.
Yeah, and I think what you're highlighting there, which I think is really important, is that recovery is the other half of performance. So when we are recovering and making time for recovery and making space, that is often when you get these like aha moments or you connect things together. For me, even just this week, I had to leave a workshop that I was facilitating early because I was just at my limit. I recognized I was at my limit. Luckily, I had a really supportive co-facilitator who's like, look, just leave a little bit early. And I went home and I had a rest. And then I got up early the next morning and this very rarely happens with young kids, but I managed to get to the gym and I was on the treadmill. And about halfway through the workout, which always happens to me when I'm running, I just had this idea. And I ended up texting a colleague and then he rang me. It was 7 a.m. and we just came up with this awesome idea and got it in the diary for next week. So even though I was recovering, I was ideas incubate and things kind of sit in the background. And athletes know this, right? Like, you wouldn't see an athlete training, like Eileen Gu. What an amazing woman. You wouldn't see them training day in, day out. Like, it's just not what they do, because that clearly is not going to help their performance. So we need to think about that, I think, similarly, that humans need recovery, and that's the other half performance. It's not having time off from performance. It actually is the loop that people need to go through to recover, re-energize, and then come back with all of their faculties optimized.
Yeah.
It's a factory reset on your brain.
I love that. We've gone from an industrialized idea of productivity to a factory reset of the brain. So a little bit of that.
Reset. Yeah, so scientific management is really that industrial vibe that I was talking about before. But that worked in certain environments. It doesn't, and we've designed organizations around that. But we're more so knowledge workers now, where clarity of thought, critical thinking. I listened to your last podcast on critical thinking. That's a really good example of you need space for that. That was a great podcast, by the way. Innovation is going to be huge. Empathy, connection, like, these are all things that take time. They're not things that take us away from the job. They are the job now.
Wow. I think that's kind of a bit of a mic drop moment. Let's just stop there for a second, because when you're talking, I think that's going to be hitting people quite hard, that empathy is part of the job now. All these things that I think people would, were traditionally soft skills, but now we know are really complicated skills. And again, long-term skills, things that magical learning has taught for a long time as important elements. But it's often hard to remember that this is really an important part of business. So did you want to speak about that just a little bit more?
Mm. Well, I actually was listening to some of the AI experts now, like you hear them in interviews asking or being asked, what would you recommend people in the future are actually doubling down on? Like, what jobs would you be sending them towards? And they all say softer skills. Like, it's all the stuff that can't be imitated. You can't imitate. I mean, you can. Obviously, there's been studies showing that AI can replicate empathy, but as soon as somebody knows that it's been done by AI, they actually, it's not improving loneliness. There's been some studies on that recently. Like, whoa, AI like can't do connection better than humans. Like, thank goodness, because then I think we'd be in trouble. But they'll be the source of sustained competitive advantage in the future. Those skills.
Wow. Well, I think that leads nice into my question here, because this kind of floats around the idea of, like, my question that I sent through was, I picked up in your book the idea of psychological safety, how important that is to good work, because, it's something that you hear a little bit more about, but it sort of might seem as a bit of an abstract concept, or, something that I don't need to implement. So I was really just wanted to ask, how important is psychological safety to making good work and a good workplace? And what's the cost of psychological danger at work?
Yeah. Yeah. So to get a bit technical here with you, which I do think it's an important distinction, because they're both important. We have psychological safety, which is talked about a lot at the moment, which is an idea brought to us by Amy Edmondson originally, doing work around the performance of teams. And what she discovered was that the teams that had the best performance were they felt safe enough to be able to talk about mistakes and issues and just have these conversations. They call things out in healthcare. Like, for example, what concern about a patient, you want everyone to feel, if they see something, to say it. So that's there's that idea. So that's really important. And where that's important to your question, when we're talking about good work, what you're wanting to do is it's not a revolutionary idea. It really is about going and talking to your people around what does good work look like, and what are some of the things we're doing that just like that cost you unnecessarily. And people need to feel comfortable talking about the really dumb things that organizations do. Because often, if you think about the most senior people in the organization, and this becomes an unaccountability machine, are so far removed from the work that they don't actually see the problems anymore. So we need to be creating environments where people can talk about that stuff. Those things can bubble to the surface. People aren't going to hide it. Bad news is encouraged. Learning forward is encouraged. Making mistakes is encouraged, because we need to move fast these days. And so if you're not feeling safe to innovate and to try, people overthink things and then they've missed the opportunity. So I think there's that form of psychological safety is absolutely critical, and I'd say is a foundation. Then we also have psychosocial safety, which is often also called psychological safety. So that is more of a legal requirement, if you like, but it's about the environment, the psychological and social environment. So psychosocial environment. So it's about being able to look at the environment that's created around people and identify, address, and control risks to people's mental health. So things like excessive workload, low control, bullying, those, and harassment. They're all quantifiable aspects of the psychosocial environment. So they can actually be quantified. So both of those things are important, and they just address slightly different things. But I'd say the two of those in combination is like a really powerful component. And I actually wrote a blog about this last year, because I was often hearing those words used interchangeably, which is almost but not quite right. So if it's useful, we can put that in the show notes for people to read.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, that's linked available. So go check out the description there. You can click in, sort of have a bit of a deeper dive there. And I just wanted to kind of just chat about one thing, because this has sparked two really just quick ideas for me that I just kind of wanted to cover. One was we had a friend of the show, Brent Forrester, who was a writer on The Simpsons in the early days, and then became the head writer of the Office US. And he was telling us about their creative process, and it ties into what you're talking about here, which is that when they're writing an episode, the first thing they do is they have a no criticism round where everyone just throws out ideas and there's no criticism allowed at all. And the idea is essentially to create that sort of massive psychological safety so that no one feels like any idea is bad, and it allows for like almost the most creativity, and then from there you can go, oh, these are the best ideas, and refine from that process. But yeah, what you're talking about there sort of rings true to me there. And then I think another thing that kind of rings true is you can almost think of how, I guess a litmus test is almost how suggestions are handled, like whether up the chain or sort of down the chain, because that's almost, how much do people feel safe to offer suggestions? How are they responded to? And that's kind of something that you can kind of check in on at a day-to-day level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the responsibility of managers to actually take that on. So there's some work done by John Higgins and Megan Wright in the UK, which I really love. They talk about truth to power, which you might have heard about that as a concept. But they say this thing, which I love, which is, what's the problem with saying my door is always open? Because if you think about it, we all say that. And what we're trying to say, the intention there is you can come to me at any point. But actually what you're also saying is, well, it's my choice whether I come or go. I have a door. You need to come to me. So what we really need leaders to do is to actually leave the office, as the proverbial, probably these days, corner office, and actually go out and be better listeners, better at asking questions, as opposed to training up our people in how to speak up, which kind of irks me, because people don't have problems speaking up. Usually it's not a skill deficit. Usually there's something in the system that's making people think about that risk and not wanting to take that risk. It feels like it's not worth it. It's not worth the personal risk. And so that's why you then get huge scale ethical disasters and other disasters happening in organizations, and people had no idea. Well, someone always knows. Someone always knows.
Wow. Well, hold on. Danette, did you want to say something?
No. I was just totally agreeing. And Dr. Kat, I used to be CFO at Safe Work Australia. So you did such a great job there about the psychosocial, and so true. But I really like that last bit, because I also worked at Arthur Andersen, and they were obviously involved in some ethical challenges long time ago. After I left. Yeah. So, some great conversations. Anyway, I'll hand it back to Jez. I just wanted to acknowledge, great sources there, and I love your enthusiasm around this topic.
It's so important. Well, thank you for the work you've done. You might have heard then, Danette, of the integrated approach to workplace mental health. So that's the prevent harm, promote the positive, and respond to worker all signs of mental illness. So that was a model my colleague Tony LaMontagna and I developed in 2014 during my postdoc.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I think that is actually a really good example, because what you're just talking about, Jez, is innovation, right? And Tony and I and our other colleague, Ange, and we were working with another woman, Alison Milner, at that point, we could not be more different. But we had we had different perspectives on the same topic, which was mental health. We came from very different frames. And in many places, when those ideas collide, that creates conflict. And so people just don't do it. But when you have safety, you can have both significant intellectual honesty, and I don't feel like you're criticizing me as a person. We're just criticizing and critiquing the ideas. So that's called task conflict as opposed to relationship conflict. That is a really nurturing environment for innovation and a learning culture, which is how that model came about, because we were the first to pull all those ideas together, because we recognized we'd all been studying different parts of it, and all of those areas of research were traveling along really completely independently. And in my PhD, I actually started looking at Tony's work and my work, and was like, oh, this would be cool. Like, how would these come together? One is about prevention and systems. Mine was more about positive approaches and individual. And I was like, well, why can't we do both? And what might that look like? And that's then and then Tony was doing a lot of work in that space as well. And we brought them together. And then now it's like picked up by all of the main regulators, but also bodies like the ILO, the World Health Organization cites it. And now most models in organizations have that in there, and they don't realize where it came from. It's just become part of the vernacular.
Love that.
Awesome. Well, I think we've got time for one more question here, and then we'll grab some final thoughts. So, great chat, though. We're going to have you back to sort of get through some more discussions about this, because this has been really interesting. I might just throw to Al's question here, and Al's written in, my question is, can you tell us more about how leaders can build workplaces that people enjoy being a part of and not just tolerating?
So I really do think it comes back down to that point that we were talking about earlier, where people want to come into work and feel like they can be human, and that they want to feel like they matter. Like at our core, we all want to feel like we matter. We don't want to feel like an employee ID number or a resource, an item in budget that can just be deleted. We come in with lives, feelings, parents, kids, brains that work the way they do, and we're all oftentimes trying to do our best, but things get in the way. So I think if you create an environment where you care more about the person and their career than the job they're in right now, that will both in the short term get the most out of them. But I would say longer term, I've got plenty of examples where that kind of mindset has created a sense of loyalty, where that person might become a client one day, or that person might work for you again one day, or you're setting up a trajectory for that person to actually then create that same environment somewhere else. And so we start to get this ripple effect of kindness and mattering that stems from emulating how you're treated. So in terms of workplace, if you feel that you're surrounded by people who believe what you believe and who care about you as a person, you'll do almost anything for them. If you make people feel like they're being watched, monitored, checked, surveilled, people will do less, actually. So what we're trying to do is get them to do more, but I think they actually do less. And then the longer term effect of that is I think it creates not just a better workplace culture, but a better world, because we emulate that in other organizations.
Yeah, wow. I mean, what a sort of bombshell to drop at the end, but I think it's such a good one because it's, I think this really talks so much about the long term versus the short term and the power of the long term in a lot of ways. But I want to get some other final thoughts here. So I might throw over to Graham. Graham, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Jez. So many. I like a couple of things that stood out, and I didn't get the exact wording, so I apologise for that, Dr. Cat. But one of the statements you shared about empathy, things like empathy, connection, the soft skill stuff not being part of the job, they are the job. And I love the phrase the unaccountability machine, and the connotations behind that. Can you look? Is it inappropriate to suggest that? Can you just get like a sitter / housekeeper person to look after everything where you are for a week? Maybe come down the farm so we can chat longer.
Yes. Well, I grew up on a farm, so I'd be very comfortable hanging out with you on the farm. Could I bring my kids?
Yes.
Yes, they'd love it.
Yep.
Well, then yes, absolutely, I'd love to. But
Okay.
I should also say that the unaccountability machine is a book, so I can't pretend to have come up with that. But the concept really resonated with me because I'm so interested in systems and how systems create problems, and how do we create these issues for ourselves, particularly I would say in, unfortunately, government organisations, which is a pet peeve for me because they often employ some of the most important people in our society and we treat them the worst.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to change them because of these issues with the system. And I wish I knew how to change that quickly, but I don't think it's any one person's job. I think we actually all collectively need to want to change that.
Yeah, thank you. One of the other phrases that jumped out at me earlier when you were talking about some of the complexities and all of this stuff, and I can't remember where I first heard the phrase, but this is a wicked problem.
Yes.
It's not as simple. There's a really easy technical fix that'll make all of this go. Well, there sort of is, but it involves us not being here anymore, which, if we just gave planet Earth back to the dinosaurs, they were doing pretty well for a bloody long time before we rocked up.
Yes. Or if we just abolished every organisation and started again.
No, well, let's go with that. Plan B.
Whichever's easier, exactly. Jeanette, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah. So I love the conversation. Love the 6 C's. I also really enjoyed the bit around, and you're preaching to the converted here, because I'm always talking to people about the brain doesn't do the heavy lifting when they're in the work. It's actually in the spaces. So that reminder for people that space is where we need to be. The soft skills are actually not soft. They're power skills, and they're way more difficult than the technical skills. So I really love that advice around leaders. Get up from behind your desk and get out there and talk to your people, get to know them, get to know what they want in their career and help them, because then you fuel not just good work, but great impactful work. And I really loved your Oz Harvest story too. So Dr. Kat, we definitely have to get you back. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Your pleasure. Thank you for the insightful questions.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, I agree. Great questions, Danae and Graham. I think this is a great convo. And I just want to say, like, I took so many notes as well. Just so many things that I wanted to pick apart. I think I asked a lot of the questions I wanted to ask, though. But I think we ended up taking this conversation in a lot of different interesting places. Dr. Kat, did you have any final thoughts that you had on this conversation, and any things that we maybe didn't get to?
Maybe final thoughts are that I think no matter who you are and what role you play in an organization, whether you be a very senior leader, middle management, or a team member, we all have a role to play in this. And I do think good work at its core is about creating a movement. And I think it's an idea whose time has come. And it's not necessarily a revolutionary idea, but I think it is a really timely one. So for me, writing this book was about putting the information that I've collected over the last 20 years into what is hopefully a relatively accessible and quite short book, actually, for people to go, so it's okay to not accept that, or I should be expecting more or wanting more, or here are some ways that I can do that, even as an individual contributor, right up to leader. There's things we all need to do. And if we're swimming in the same direction, I do think that we can create a better world through work.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great message to leave us on after potentially destroying all organizations and rebuilding them. This can be the framework going forward, and I think that that's an inspiring place to be. Now, obviously, people will have listened to this and gone, I want to do the me to we to us. I need to read this book. I need to follow that pathway. And I also maybe want to reach out to you and sort of get into some of these blogs that you're talking about, because obviously there's going to be the one connected, but people are going to want to get involved. So do you want to tell us where the best places to get the book and to reach out to you are?
Definitely. So best place to get the book, so it's in bookstores. I would love for us to support our local bookstores because we often buy online, don't we? So it's in all your local bookstores. It's online in Booktopia and Amazon. And then in terms of keeping in touch with me, well, firstly, I'd love that. LinkedIn is where I tend to be most engaged, but I also have a website, which is drkatpage.com. And then searching also for Dr. Kat Page on Instagram and LinkedIn, you can find me. And I also work for a firm by many who is doing a lot of work in this space, and we are creating a community of like-minded leaders and people. So if you want to check out By Many, you can come to BYMANY, bymany.com.au.
Excellent. Well, we're excited to see a couple of the magical learners jump over there and build on what has been a great conversation we've started here. I want to thank Danette and Graham. Thank you so much for being on today and asking great questions from the mobile recording studio. We appreciate you being on. Dr. Kat Page, great conversation, and I think this book is something that everybody can use. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for listening and sharing. We're almost at 300 episodes. We're in the 290s, so that's very exciting. So thank you, everybody, for sharing and listening. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.